Well, welcome to the Petty Details. This is Justin, and Gerald Jones is with me, one of our former customers, and we're going to talk about salvage value and retaining the salvage. Gerald had a total loss on his Ford Edge, right? Is that right?
Yeah. Ford
Yeah,
Edge.
yeah,
Yep.
and he was dealing with Progressive on his claim. And man, I tell you, Gerald, first of all, thanks for joining me, and good
Yeah,
morning.
absolutely. Good morning.
I tell you, his claim was it took a lot longer than we wanted it to, and it wasn't for lack of trying. We did everything we could do to try to get his insurance company to play nice with us, and it was just one of those cases that um, it's not common for this to happen, but it's something that happens pretty regular with regard to when you retain salvage. And so one of our other podcasts recently is about salvage retention and the pros and cons of retaining salvage. So Gerald, let's start with how the damage occurred to your vehicle. Remember, of
Yeah.
course you remember.
First off, going back, you mentioned when you introduced me, you said former customer. I think I'll always be a current customer. So who knows what's going to happen in the future, but you got me. I'm sticking with you forever. But basically, this whole thing, a tree fell on my car in a wicked thunderstorm. I watched it hit my wife's car next to that, and no damage to hers, but damage to the hood of my car, busted up the sunroof really bad. But it wasn't, one of those claims that you're like, well, this is going to be, a complete and total loss by any stretch of the imagination. So when we started this whole process, we thought, oh, well, we've got a good insurance. We're good customers. And, I'm 54 years old. I've got really good, you know, uh, history in the insurance business. So surely they'll kind of keep my claim really simple and easy. Well, that wasn't the case. And so, as you know, I'm kind of getting ahead of us a little bit, but I'll just drop this in. When I took the car to the body shop, they were just doing a real thorough look and examination of what was needed to be replaced. And during that time, I've got all the confidence in the world with this particular body shop. They're outstanding, and we can get into that later. But I found out that the insurance company just decided that they wanted to deem my car a total loss out of nowhere. And it had, 139,000 miles on it. It's paid off, and I've been driving. I had no problems whatsoever. And then I turned to petty details because I had nowhere to go. And that was a referral through two friends of friends and my brother as well. So you guys took great care of me, and we can get into the rest now.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious, a lot of times whenever the insurance company comes out and looks at the vehicle initially, they don't write up all of the damages. And the shop is telling them that it's a much more than what they think it is. Was that the case in yours? I don't recall if that was the case. Did they take a little while to determine it to be totaled, or did they just say it was totaled pretty quickly right after looking at it?
Pretty quickly right after that. I was shocked. In
Yeah.
fact, there were a couple things. I hadn't seen an estimate from the body shop just yet, but they said, we have to go through and do a thorough determination because we're going to fix the car properly, which I appreciate and totally respect what they're doing. They didn't want me having salvage parts, and they wanted me to have original parts. And that's that. And so I'm thinking maybe it's maybe $4,000 if that, or $3,000 or two, who knows? And then that's when it got out of hand. And what happened was it wasn't that they detailed a long laundry list of items that needed to be replaced. It was just the fact that they thought that this was an old junky car and somebody needed to the insurance company wanted to either take it from me or basically say that it's not worth us fixing this vehicle for you.
Yours was a little strange to me when I first looked at it because the estimate that I saw for the repair cost was only like $2,000, like $2,031 or something initially. And so I thought it was strange that they were totaling it when I first looked at it, but it's not uncommon to have a lot of damage that they don't write up. And so clearly either they thought the vehicle's value was way lower than I did, or the damages were more than they had written up on it. But all that being said, when they made the offer for the total loss, do you recall how much they offered you and how low you thought it was? Was that mainly the reason you called us, because the offer was low?
Yeah, well, it took forever for them to even respond to me about anything. So therein lies the problem. They tell me that I'm total loss, and I don't even know what a salvage claim is. I don't even know what an appraisal clause is at this point. And so I'm sitting there wondering, like, what in the world am I going to do without a car? And they're only going to give me X number of dollars. I think it was like 10,911, 10,084.31 for 2015 Ford Edge that was 139,000 miles or whatever. So to me, that felt like that was extremely low when the market value was showing something like 17, 18,000, possibly more. The problem that I have with it though is that the car is paid off and I'll drive that thing until the wheels fall off.
Yeah,
So
drive it
no
if
one
you.
considers that, and so at
Yeah.
that point is when I started getting really angry because I'm like, you're taking my vehicle from me and you're literally telling me that you're going to give me the X number of dollars, which doesn't measure up to anything what the market's bringing. And then as I'm saying this right now, I'm boiling. I mean, I've got goosebumps right now because I was so pissed. So, you think as a consumer, where do you turn? You have no options. Literally, you think, what am I going to do? I'm just going to have to take this, and you can't fight back. So that's how I ended up knocking on the door.
Yeah, and yours was the titanium edition too of that vehicle, which was
Correct.
the one of the higher trim levels. Well, let's talk about why you. Well, first of all, let me just say this. You know, when you have a total loss like that, and this one, was not a collision. This was the, of storm damage with the tree, and so it lends to, that's one of the reasons why you might want to keep a vehicle like hail damage or tree damage, because it's not actually collision damage that's jolting the entire mechanics of the vehicle, but it's almost just cosmetic unless it hits right on a pillar or something like that. And so I think, was that part of the reason why you were going to keep it, because you can still drive it and everything,
Correct.
correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't care what it looks like, and
Yeah.
it's going to drive forever. And
Yeah.
so
So
that's a good point. There's no reason to really, I guess, affect the consumer's well-being and their pocketbook like that. Let us keep driving the vehicle no matter what it looks like cosmetically. I would, even so, with the damage on the hood and any hail damage and any cosmetic stuff, I'd keep driving it the way it is. But I want to have it fixed, so that if I were to trade it in the future, then it's not going to be considered, a lowball offer.
yeah, at least you won't have to get popped for the damage again if you trade it.
Yeah,
One thing that's interesting for anybody that's going through this and listening to it, if you're considering to keep your vehicle, what a lot of people don't know is that the insurance company doesn't have to let you keep the vehicle.
correct.
That's haven't had that happen except for once or twice, where the insurance company's like, no, if you file a claim, we're keeping it. They normally will let the person keep it, but if you look in your payment of loss section, typically is where that's found in your policy. It's like, we may retain all or part of the damaged property, at at an agreed or appraised value is typically how it reads there. And so a lot of people just assume they can keep their vehicle, but if you're filing a claim, the terms of the contract, are governing how that claim, is managed, and so they have the right to keep it. But in this case, they said fine, they'd let you keep the vehicle. And so, quick summary, sort of, it was like the 10.9 or something, right around that amount that they offered. And then once you guys agreed that you were going to keep the vehicle, then they said the salvage value was 4633, like a
Correct.
little over $4,600. So that wasn't too terrible of a salvage value in my mind. It seemed like it might be a little bit high, but it wasn't too bad. But that's sort of where all the fun began. And for us, is because I've dealt with these claims a lot, and when people are keeping their vehicle, especially with this particular company, Progressive, they are pretty consistent about changing the salvage value if you invoke appraisal clause and force them to pay a higher cash value on the vehicle. So Gerald and I talked about that, and we wanted to address that first before he spent any money or anything on the appraisal clause. Because, for example, if they're offering him, let's just say 11 to make it a round number there, if they're offering him 11 and they're taking out 4,500, then we get the value up to, let's say 13. And so we've added $2,000 to it. They can just change the salvage value by $2,000 and negate the entire process. And I've
Yeah.
had them I've had them do that. I mean, I've had them do exactly that on other claims, two other ones, and that's when I learned that lesson. And it's like, no, let's address this. And I even pulled up some of the so. What we did is we try to get Progressive to just acknowledge that if Gerald were to invoke his appraisal clause, is it agreed upon that both the salvage value and the cash value are part of the appraisal clause? Which, if we look at the language of the appraisal clause, did you have that language?
Yeah, I do have it here.
I think I've got it too, and I'm not sure. I can't share it from my side because I've got it on two different computers. But basically, it reads that if we cannot agree with you on the amount of a loss, then we or you may demand an appraisal of the loss. And then it gives a little bit of, it says within 30 days of any demand for an appraisal, each party shall appoint a competent appraiser and shall notify the other party of that appraiser's identity. The appraisers will determine the amount of loss. If they fail to agree, the disagreement will be submitted to a qualified umpire chosen by the appraisers. If the two appraisers are unable to agree upon an umpire within 15 days, we or you may request that a judge of a court of record in the county where you reside select an umpire. Then it goes on to say the appraisers and the umpire will determine the amount of loss. The amount of loss agreed to by both appraisers or by one appraiser and the umpire will be binding. You will pay your appraiser's fees and expenses. We will pay our appraiser's fees and expenses, and all other expenses of the appraisal, including payment of the umpire, if one is selected, will be shared equally between you and us. Neither we nor you waive any rights under this policy by agreeing to an appraisal. I know that sort of wrote for me to read that whole thing, but the language is interesting on these because it's not all the same language in each policy. This particular appraisal clause has more in it than a lot of them, frankly. So this is a little bit better of an appraisal clause than a lot of the ones that I see, which are vague, But it's pretty clear there that they don't talk about actual cash value or salvage value or any of that kind of stuff in the appraisal clause. It's just the amount of loss. That's
Correct.
what it's talking about. So we called and talked to them, or actually emailed back and forth, I should say, with the adjuster. And I think your initial inquiry was something to the effect of, hey, Progressive, in reference to the subject claim, we disagree as to the amount of my loss, and I intend to use the appraisal provision of my policy to resolve the amount. Since I'm retaining the salvage, I expect the salvage value will be included in the appraisal process. Please confirm this. So that was the initial sort of inquiry to try to get them to agree that, yeah, and then do you have some of those correspondences as well?
Yeah, it's about a mile long because we went back and forth because they would never answer the question. And the key word in your initial outreach, my intent, it was my intent to pull my appraisal clause. It never said that I'm doing it. It never said that I'm just considering it. And they never once acknowledged any of that all the
Yeah.
way through for months. And so, not to name any names on these emails at all, that's not important. But the fact of the matter was that they never addressed any of my questions with regards to how we wanted to actually consider invoking the appraisal clause. They just kind of skip over it. And they're saying, well, you already have your offer. You have your salvage amount. You have whatever, this, that, and the other. And we could never get them to really commit to anything. So that just went back and forth and back and forth. And it got to be comical, if you recall.
Yeah, and I suggested filing a complaint with the Department of Insurance on it, and you
And we
did.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
did
that
just
didn't,
that.
and how
And
did
the
that work
Department of
out?
Insurance, I think that experience was probably even worse, only because everything was kicking the can. Everybody's kicking the can, and no one wanted to weigh in on either side. As a consumer, I go to the Texas Department of Insurance thinking that they're going to come and help me solve the problem, or maybe weigh in, or maybe just mediate. Well, none of that happened. They just kept saying, "Well, Progressive has made their offer. You have the right to take the offer or not." I'm like, wait a minute, no, we're needing some more information here as to how are we going to retain these numbers if we go into this mediation or this negotiation? And so they never would answer our questions with the TDI. And quite frankly, there was one lady that had not been working there, and she's sending me emails from her email account. And I had found along the way that she wasn't working there anymore. So all these emails were coming to me from an account that some lady had already been either terminated or moved on from it. So that we could get into a whole nother podcast,
Yeah. Oh
another
man,
episode.
the Department of Insurance, gosh, and believe me, it definitely could be numerous different podcasts for
Yeah,
just the
well,
issues that you deal with the Department of Insurance on. They're just, they just don't, they're not satisfying to get involved. There are some situations where they could help you, but when you're trying to get clarification on a policy language or anything like that, or trying to get the carrier to, do the right thing, they just don't. There's the basic response is, well, that's a legal issue that has to be taken up with the courts, or just not addressing it. And that was sort of what happened, is they wouldn't address the issue, and we were clear about the issue. It's like,
yeah,
look, specifically, this is what we're asking about. Nope, would not respond to it. I mean, I had some examples of that, from the responses.
yeah. And to add to that, there's some really nice people within that organization and some that absolutely want to be as helpful as possible. They also are very protective of, how much information that they're willing to share. But within that process, there were some older ladies and younger ladies and some gentlemen in between that were offering me some really good sound advice during that process. And as I would ask the question to the top level management, not to the president or whatever at the very top, but very close. And neither he nor anybody else in his department would ever weigh in on this situation at all. And so it was basically like, best of luck to you in your endeavors. And if you seek legal advice or legal counsel, we can offer you some suggestions as to what attorneys that we recommend through the state. I'm like, no way, man. I'm done. Then where do you go? Back to
Yeah.
Justin Petty.
Well, I mean, we ended up taking a risk on this one, frankly.
Yeah.
I was, we never did get that issue nailed down, although we made it very clear that our concern was that, are we including the salvage amount in the appraisal process because the owner's retaining it? We never could get that addressed by Progressive or the state or anybody else for that matter, none of the adjusters or anybody. And they did things like, when we asked about that, please confirm that'll be the case, that the salvage value will be included in the appraisal process. They responded back in response to your inquiry, yes, the salvage amount will still be deducted from the agreed value. It's
It's
like,
like cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste.
yeah,
So,
that's not our question. That wasn't our
no.
question. We know the salvage amount's going to be deducted. What we want to know is, are you going to try to change the salvage at the end, or are you going to leave it like it is? And again, so responds back, he says, look, thanks, but in response to this salvage amount, maybe my question wasn't clear. I understand that a salvage amount is agreed to during the process, but it's agreed to during the process within the appraisal clause process. And then afterwards, then that amount's going to be, taken out. Am I understanding that correctly? And then
Yeah.
the next response, do you have that next response?
Well, this one was the salvage value we currently have will be used once the appraisal clause info comes back to the independent appraiser that is hired. And then he says, once you confirm that I understand this properly, oh, that's me, sorry. Once you confirm that I understand the scope properly, then yes, we can move forward with the appraisal clause. The scope of the appraisal clause will include determining the salvage value of the vehicle. We're kind of going back a step there. But in
Mm-hmm.
these responses, it's just literally
No,
cut and
that's it.
paste, cut and paste.
Even further down from where I was at. We had to reiterate the question again and again
Oh
and
yeah,
again. Yeah, I mean, and they would just
there's
say,
pages and pages of this.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, and it's like, yeah, they responded like, look, I've attached your valuation report and the settlement summaries. In response to, is the salvage part of the appraisal clause? The answer is, I've attached your valuation report,
yeah,
and after the fees, we'll take out the salvage amount, and it's have your settlement payment of 10,908, and letting Progressive. But however, if you keep the vehicle, then there is 4633 deduction. And then they go on in another one and say, then the new salvage amount is determined after. So it was just a whole incompetency or just lack of experience with this process, or no one ever pressing on that issue before. They just get away with it. And I learned that lesson. Like I said, I had one, not too long before yours, where we got it resolved. under appraisal clause for the value of the vehicle. And we didn't really address the salvage amount because that was already agreed to. And that's another thing. You had already, I explained that too. When you send in your invoke, you should nail down that you've agreed to the salvage amount,
And
in
we did.
writing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that saved us at the end because, going too deep into it, we documented that they had made this salvage amount offer for the salvage retention. And so he was able to document that when he invoked it. So, all right, let's move on to the actual results on it and talk about that because we don't want to be on here for hours. We both, I know you've been
Yeah,
burning
I
both ends
get
of the candle.
it's all good. Back to just real quick the incompetence. To
Yeah.
me, it was you mentioned it incompetence, maybe lack of either training or having been in that situation or whatever. But as a consumer, as a customer, as progressive client, I'm sitting there thinking you're supposed to be looking out for your customer, and that's the number one thing that they weren't doing. But second to that is that we just had to keep staying on them with the whole back and forth. And so I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but what I felt like was happening is they would take this stuff to the top, and the top was probably looking down and saying, okay, just kick the can as far as you can. They'll go away. They'll go away. They'll go away. And I think that's really what helped us more in the long run too. It's just that we stuck to our guns and we weren't going to let them say no and we weren't going to go away. So that
Yeah.
persistence was really key. And I think in the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I tell that to a lot of people. It's like, look, it's a lot of it's the principle of the matter. You're not going to just get me to go away by making the process hard, which is what it seems like happens. It's like
Yeah.
I don't know that they purposely do that, but the best practices that they teach you, I was an adjuster for years and we had rigid sort of best practices that we went by. And they were tailored to get claims settled quickly and not get too much in depth, on it. And if you had a problem claim, there is no best practice for a problem claim. So it just sat. And
Yeah.
like you said, you would go up to somebody above you, supervisor, manager, VP of claims, until you get somebody that can tell you what to do on that claim. And that's the reason I started this company is because I realized that way back, that nobody knows what they're doing here. It's like
Yeah.
there's only a few people that have a lot of experience and can guide these adjusters the right way. And it's really, I feel really bad about it for adjusters, a little bit bad, I should say, because it's like it wasn't like that 30 years ago, when I started.
Yeah.
And so it's like they trained us differently and we had more leverage. We could settle a claim when there was a dispute. This claim could have been settled a long, long time before it was just with a few $1,000s of authority. And they wouldn't have had to look at this claim again. I mean, they went in the hole working this claim because we were persistent. And, that going back to your point is you can't give up. You've got to keep the ball in their court. You've got to throw it back to them, make them have to work that claim and respond to it. And so that's what we ended up doing. And we ended up, this happened, what was this? This happened in May, right, of 2024.
It was actually March 2024, and I think the last with the settlement that we ended up with, that had to be December because I remember my daughter was having twins in the hospital
Oh,
when
yeah.
you
Oh,
called
yeah. I
me with the
remember
good
that.
news.
Yes.
That was December 5th when she had the twins. So right around there. That's a long time, y'all. Long time to go through that.
Yeah, I mean, it was December the 5th. That's correct. Yeah. So let's talk about quickly. So you invoked the appraisal clause on it, and let's see, when did you invoke it? On
Uh,
November. It was in November, like November the 26th. I kept that note.
yep. I got that here too.
So from the time the accident occurred all the way up to November, before you actually just were like, "Oh," and we invoked, and it's like, all right, let's do it. And we had conversation after conversation about it. And it's like, okay, let's just invoke it. I know who they normally name as their appraisers, and hopefully I can, we'll get somebody that's reasonable and we can just, make it happen. So let's just bite the bullet and go ahead and see what can happen.
And to add that real quick, Justin, one of the reasons that I was ready to do it is I had just not throwing in the towel at all. I was just like, I'm tired of messing with these guys, and I don't want to deal with this. I was prepared to lose the whole thing. I mean, take the car, take whatever. It's, I was done with it. But I knew that, if we didn't stand behind our guns and stand behind what we were doing and the principles that we had too, fighting back, then what was it all for, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, after you got it, after you invoked on this, then they did name a company that I knew and had worked with before. They're not supposed to name a company, they're supposed to name a person, but they never do that. They just name a company that typically writes damage estimates, and not doesn't negotiate settlements like this. But this particular company, there's a few guys there that they use for these. And the guy that they named was a guy that hasn't done a huge amount of these, and I've only dealt with him a couple of times, and he's not fun to deal with. He's one of those matter of fact guys that's just wants to put a number and not do anything else and just say, this is my number, take it or leave it. Well, I mean, that's not the supposed to begin with. We're supposed to discuss it, and of course, he was using low values compared to the values that I had on this vehicle. When I ran my initial numbers on it, I was at about 15 or 16,000
Yeah.
whenever I looked at it. And so I wasn't at the top end. I try to be realistic on those when I'm looking at it to make sure that I'm not inflating the value of a vehicle, because that doesn't help anybody. So I was real careful about looking at that. So I had it at right around 15,000. And that would have been, look, that's what, $4,000 different than what they were offering.
Yeah.
There was enough there for you to pay my appraisal fee and still potentially get this resolved, even if we have to concede some and come down off of that 15,000. And especially because we were considering the fact that you had an idea of how much it would take to repair the vehicle, and with the current salvage value and a better settlement offer, then you would be able to, not have to come out of pocket very much to fix the vehicle, because the
Right.
difference between the two would have been real close, or maybe a little bit, it would have been really close, but not at the 10.9 minus the 46. But
Right.
it couldn't. It was. I think the real repair cost was like 8 or something like that, 8 or
Yeah.
9.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Close. Yeah. Right in between.
yeah. And so we went through the process, and of course, the other appraiser would not agree to include the salvage in the discussions, and just flat out told me that Progressive didn't allow them to do that. you
Mm.
know, and it's like, that's not how that works. You're supposed to be an independent appraiser. But if you notice in your clause, I think that was something I meant to say before, that in that appraisal clause language, it doesn't say disinterested in Progressive's language. That's the language that's approved by the Insurance Services Office, ISO. But in Progressives and in other carriers, they've removed that term disinterested or unbiased. They just say competent. Each party shall appoint a competent appraiser, and
Right.
not a disinterested and competent appraiser. Unfortunately, that's purposeful. There's case law about it that says, well, if the policy doesn't say disinterested, then you can hire somebody that, is going to fight for you and advocate and all of that. And so it's like they can actually use somebody that's not disinterested. So all of that happened. This claim, everything happened on this claim. Ultimately, we were able to get an award that did have the salvage value on it. I had to sort of persuade the other appraisers that, look, this has already been agreed to. Here it is where it was agreed to. We had enough to show that. I said, look, just call, and find out. And he just yielded. I produced an award that included the salvage amount that was initially agreed to. And so when we wrote the award up, we wrote the value of the vehicle and the salvage amount. And so it worked out to where they couldn't change that salvage. Did not like that one bit. It was just not their typical thing to do, is to change that salvage value at the end, because they're just using a percentage of
Yeah.
the value is what they're doing. They're not actually getting a salvage bid. They're just using an agreed upon percentage that they have with IAA or Copart that will give them a salvage bid. You got,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
go ahead.
so I was going to ask you, was that meeting in person? I can't remember because it was all running together during that time, but, or is that
No,
something that you do on phone, I guess?
all of this was over the phone or via email, so we didn't have to actually meet up with anybody. But that's not. I have done that plenty of times, but it's just
Yeah.
this one didn't have to do that. And the guy was, they make a living not getting fired from the company that they work at.
Yeah.
They're just following rules. And I understand it, but it's frustrating when it's somebody's property and their money and all of that stuff is like they just don't seem to care very much. It's just they're just going along to get along, and that just irritates me when people are like that. I'm just not like that. And
Yeah.
we sort of got along because of that same fact is that look, you're not getting, no, I'm not a chump. I'm not going away.
Yeah.
And so,
I'm too old to be messed with like this. But at the same time, I was very pleased with the not only the process of it all, start to finish, and how you guys, Jen and your whole team, you just kind of walk us through everything and made me feel like, I'm doing the right thing all the way through the to the very end. And for me, I was a lucky one, and I'm thankful for all your hard work and determination and that fight and that persistence that we talked about. But most importantly, that hopefully people will listen to this podcast and be able to hear that there is hope. There are people like Justin and Jen and Petty Details and everything that will go to bat for you like that. And to me, if it happens again or I have referrals, that's just the way that we all make a living. And by all means, I think that you're top notch people.
well,
And
thanks,
by
man.
far, what we experience from this whole process is just never give up. That's the thing. I've given
Yeah.
up on other deals because I just had nowhere to go.
I
Now
mean,
we're
that's exactly right. And it's sort of the trick. That's how insurance companies get people is
Yeah,
you just get sick of them. You just get sick of dealing with them. You spend 20 minutes every time you try to get somebody on the phone, gotta leave a message, then they don't answer, they don't call you back, and it's
yeah,
it's so wears you down so much. But let me say this really quickly because we'll wrap it up here. First of all, thank you for the big plugs and stuff. It's
oh
gratifying when
yeah,
you can when you can help somebody. I want to not leave people hanging and tell them the result. Okay, the
yeah. No,
numbers.
I know.
Okay,
That's
yeah.
that's
It
the
was.
big
I mean,
reveal.
yeah. It wasn't like we won, but we won. You know what I mean? It
Yeah,
wasn't like we won a huge amount or anything like that. But we persisted. We were able to get everything done, and at the end of it, it was you got right at about $15,000. 14,975 is what the
correct.
final number was. And then your deductible, and then the salvage amount that was originally agreed upon, which wasn't too bad, we thought, but I couldn't get the other appraiser to even discuss it. I wanted to discuss that and get it lower, but I couldn't. They wouldn't do that, and
Yeah,
so our best bet was to just leave it at what it was. And so we were able to do that, and yeah, got an award for the 14 cash value plus taxes, and then minus the deductible and salvage, which gave you just enough, I think, to
yeah.
the repair done.
And able to do my repair and not have to have my car taken away from me and have to buy another damn car. That was the bottom line.
Yeah, and
Amazing.
another thing too is your vehicle doesn't have a salvage title.
Yeah, correct. That's another thing we didn't add to
Yeah,
that.
my other podcast talks about that a little bit, but that's one of the pros and cons of salvage retention is it going to have a salvage title when you retain it? Yours didn't qualify for that. Um,
Because it was paid off, right? So that was the only thing that.
no, it's because the Department of Motor Vehicles manages the definitions. It's a statute. So the definition of a salvage vehicle is in Texas is really quickly is that the value of the vehicle has to the damages, not counting the paint, labor, and materials. Okay, so the damages have to exceed 100% of the value of the vehicle. So when you increase the value and the damages are below that amount, whatever the value of the vehicle is, if the damages are less than that, or even sometimes if they're more, if you take out the paint labor and paint materials, if those damages are less than the value of the car, it does not meet the definition of a salvage vehicle, and the insurance company cannot force you to get a salvage title, but they will try it. A lot of times they'll ask you to sign a salvage retention agreement and send it to the state, when in reality it's not qualify as a salvage vehicle. They can call it a total anytime they want to, but those are different terms. Total and salvage are not the same thing. So the insurance company can total it when it's not a salvage vehicle, and that was another good reason that you could get out of this by keeping your vehicle, and it came out, to your advantage. No salvage title, anything like that. You got enough to keep it and repair it, and so all of that worked out real good on your case. And so we try to look at that up front. But yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
the story of Gerald's claim. I really appreciate you showing up and coordinating with us to be on the podcast. You were an awesome guest. You're better than
Thanks.
I am. I'm still learning how to do stuff on the podcast. Jen just roped me into doing it. So I'm like, okay, we'll do it. Nobody talks about this stuff on the internet.
I was gonna say you guys make sense of it. Yeah, it really does. It's the way that you describe it and the way that you walk people through it. That's the key right there. Because there's a lot of information here for us to process, and I'm sure people on some of this podcast are gonna be like, "That's over my head." But folks, do your homework, dive in, get with Jen, get with Justin, get with Petty. They'll take good care of you. It's awesome. Thanks for having me. It's a good
I
day.
appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
I
All right,
look
man.
forward to
Don't
working
call
with
me.
y'all
Yeah, don't call
soon.
me, but don't forget me. Yeah,
How about I refer you? That's all.
yeah, sounds good.